Hi everyone, it's Joe here from Lawn Solutions Australia and welcome to this episode of Turf Talk, my favourite kind of episode where I'm joined by my colleague Nathan. Nath, how you going?
Good, Joe. Thanks for having me. Good to be here.
And what's on the agenda for today?
Well, it's the start of summer, so it's starting to get pretty hot. So in this podcast, we wanted to take a look at what the key signs of heat stress are and things to keep an eye on with our lawns so that we can make sure that we can assist them through the summer period as best we can.
Yep, sure. And there's a common misconception out there about warm season grasses like buffalo, couch, kikuyu, zoysia, that if you don't do anything over summer, they're just going to thrive and go really well because they're warm season grasses. But the opposite is actually true. If you don't treat your warm season grass right over summer, it can actually go into a period of dormancy, similar to what they do in the winter months as well. We won't talk about cool season grasses much here today because basically you just got to water them constantly.
That's pretty much it, yeah.
to keep them alive. But with warm season grasses, now I just mentioned they go into a period of dormancy if you don't look after them correctly over the hot, dry season. What kind of things are you looking for in terms of stress signs with warm season turf grasses in the hot months?
Yeah, and we've started to see some examples of it recently where people aren't sure what's going on, and it's generally the first thing they'll see is a wilting or slight discoloration or darkening of some patches or areas in the lawn. That's sort of one of the key first things we see before it obviously gets worse from there if it's left unattended to. A really obvious one is when you just walk across the lawn, you're used to it bouncing straight back up and responding quite well, but at the moment if it's a little bit heat stress, you'll see footmarks in the grass behind you as you're walking across. So there's probably the first two main ones we're starting to see at the moment before it starts to get worse.
It's basic dehydration off the leaf, and if people are concerned about sections of their lawn over the summer months and you haven't had rain in a couple of weeks, we're on the south coast of New South Wales and we're getting we had a little bit of a shower last weekend, but before that we had a lot of dry weather, and we had a lot of people sending us images of their lawn. And what I say to them in summer is, the first thing you should do is just drown it for a couple of days. Give it a really good drink every morning and see what it responds. And 9 times out of 10, your problem's going to go away because it's just basic dehydration. So you mentioned the footprint tests, which people can do, but slight discoloration of the leaf is something to look out for as well, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's not a normal sort of appearance or look to it. Some people think, okay, maybe I've got some disease starting. It's more of a blue-grey tinge that you start to see in it, and basically it's exactly what heat stress is. So as soon as you start seeing that, that's when you want to start to take action and give it a nice deep watering. We'll go into detail of exactly how often and frequency of watering throughout this podcast, but initially we'll just look at the key signs to know that your actual lawn is in heat stress, that maybe your watering isn't on point, and that's something that needs to be rectified. And
people often say, well, I'm watering my lawn a lot, but it's still getting this appearance. So that means you've got to look at why the water isn't getting to where it needs to be. And again, we'll touch on that a little bit later on. Obviously, if you're watching on video, you'll see a bottle of lawn soaker here, which is a wetting agent, and that can often be part of the reason this is happening. But the other thing is, irrigation techniques need to be looked at too. You need to be getting a lot of water down to where it needs to get. And sometimes if you're irrigating on a 35-degree day and it's windy and you're using a soaker hose, most of your irrigation is lost before it even hits the ground. So we'll take a look at all those things today. But what we might start off with is a common question we get. There's not an exact black and white answer to this, but it's how often should I be watering my lawn? But there's a variety of factors that come into this. And before we get into the answer to this, I will say Lawn Solutions has put together a really easy to use irrigation guide where it basically says, my lawn is this old or it's mature or whatever, and it breaks it down to the temperature on that particular day. So it'll say, for example, if it's 20 degrees and overcast and there's no wind, water it this many times. If it's 35 degrees and windy, water it this many times. It'll vary greatly. A rule of thumb, trying to keep things as simple as possible when it comes to lawn care, a rule I use is, particularly if you've got a new lawn and people are unsure of how often to water it, a really good tip to do is to put 3 or 4 mil of irrigation on, 15-20 minutes with a sprinkler, whatever that might be, and then dunk a towel in water at the same time. Hang the towel on the fence. When the towel's dry, your new lawn needs to be watered again. 35 degrees and windy, that could be 6 times a day, 7 times a day. If that's the case, that's the case. It's really important to not let these new lawns dry out. But we'll talk lawns in generally now. So what are some of the factors, Nath, that sort of come into play when you're answering the question from customers of how often they should be watering their lawn?
Yeah, we ask a heap of questions in response to that, because how long's a piece of string? Like, there's so many variables and factors in play as to how much you need to water your particular lawn. Level of establishment. So you say if it's a new lawn, for example, you would water a new lawn completely differently to the way you would water an established lawn. So a big thing is obviously climate in your area and the season that you're in at that point in time and the conditions you're receiving. That's obviously point number one.
Yep.
Water restrictions are going to play a part as well. If you're in a certain area that's got restrictions on how much water you can use or at times of day you can use it. Access to and cost of water, obviously that's a key point. Cost of living pressures are important, so we don't want to be pumping our lawns through full of water and obviously not getting the best outcome out of it, or over watering and not using it as efficiently as we can.
Yep.
So yeah, obviously working on that to limit our cost of water usage is extremely important. Soil type is massive, and we forget about soil a lot, and how important it is, particularly when it comes to maintaining moisture in the soil layer, in order to make that green layer on top perform as best it can. So that's a pretty key thing. Lawn variety, obviously extremely important. Some varieties are going to perform a lot better during hot, dry conditions than others. Their drought tolerance levels are a lot better. Grasses like Tiff Tough, Smart Drop certified grasses, they're obviously not going to need or be as much thirsty as another grass, so that's going to play a part as well. Obviously, if you've got a cool season grass, you're going to have to pump a lot more water into it than a warm season grass in order to even get it to survive and come through the other side of summer. So big thing. So that's sort of some of the key areas.
Yeah, so let's drill down on a couple of these now. So you covered them off in good detail there, but the climate in your area in the season, I think you can pretty much paint Brisbane down to Melbourne over summer with the same brush in a lot of these. Obviously, Brisbane gets a little bit more humidity, but they're all hot. Australia's a hot country. Probably gets even worse when you go to Adelaide and Perth. I know you look at the weather, and Sydney, Melbourne and Brisbane are often high 20s, early 30s, and you look over and Perth's like 37, Adelaide's like 37. So, but you can treat them all as hot areas. So basically now, your lawn is going to need at least semi-regular watering to maintain acceptable quality. And it's a horses for courses thing. If you want a deep green, beautiful, vibrant lawn all the way through summer, you're obviously going to need more water than someone who just wants to keep their lawn alive. Like there's two different levels of that there. But we're not in any water restrictions yet. We've had a lot of rain over the last couple of years, but obviously they do play a factor when it comes to irrigating. But let's address sort of the access to and the cost of water thing. Obviously, water can get expensive for people if they want to constantly irrigate your lawn. That's why we need to look at mechanisms or technology that's available to you to get the same result that lots of water gives you without using lots of water. One of those things is obviously wetting agents, like we see here. What a wetting agent basically does is it gives you more bang for your buck out of your irrigation, and it helps irrigation break through the top level that may be stopping some of that water getting to where it needs to go. So wetting agents are a great thing to use. We'll focus on them in a little bit more detail later on. But soil structure is so important when it comes to this, and even if you've got an established lawn and you're seeing it dry out really, really quickly, there are still things you can do to improve its holding capacity. So when you look at soil and its ability to hold water, obviously straight sand is going to be the thing that water goes straight through most of the time. If you want to hold irrigation, straight sand isn't the best thing. You want to incorporate some organics into your profile. But if you think you've laid a lawn and it's too late, it's not. You can always top dress with, organic dynamic lifter pellets with an organic, 80-20 mix. It's not ideal for top dressing, but if you want to get some nutrients back into your soil level, you can do it that way. And that's a really important point when you're trying to build a profile that absorbs and holds more water. Obviously, if you go too far down that road and we get a wet season, you can be holding too much water, but it's about finding that balance when it comes to protecting your lawn against drought. Lawn varieties now. So you mentioned Tiff Tough before and Smart Drop certification, but there's a difference between a lot of people think it's drought tolerant, so I don't need to water it. It's not quite the case, is it? Like, drought tolerance means it'll survive harsh conditions and always come back. People get a little bit misconstrued with what that actually means.
Yeah, it will initially. Like if you did a trial, and we've done many trials with different grasses side by side, and you give them the same amount of water, or you put them under irrigation deficit, Tiff Tough thrives, and it seems to perform the best. But generally speaking, when you are talking about drought tolerance, is that if we had drought in Australia came back again now, and it's probably going to happen at some stage in the coming years, it's about which grass is going to be able to hold on the longest without water before it starts to suffer signs of plant death, before it's able to recover when it does get the water come back to it. So Tiff Tough, through those trials, goes extended periods through irrigation deficit. When it finally gets water, it's the one that bounces back. Some of the other grasses throughout these trials obviously might die completely or have certain levels of death. So that's what it's about essentially. It's about, you shouldn't expect to have a perfectly beautiful green lawn through the middle of a drought. It's just not sort of a real way to look at it. It's not ideal. But what you want to know is that your lawn's going to survive it. It's going to get through it. And when that moisture does finally come, that it's going to recover and bounce back for you.
And to the points we spoke about before, you've got to start looking at technology in order to get that green-looking lawn without the need to put so much water in. But back to sorry, I went on a little tangent before, but back to the when and how to water your lawn and how often to water your lawn. Again, our irrigation guide is a great thing to follow, but it's important to differentiate between a new lawn and an established lawn. People often hear less frequent, deeper waterings, and that's right, but for a new lawn, that's probably the worst thing you can do. It's all about more frequent and less amount of that's a horrible way to say that. More frequent but a less amount of water put on it each time, because what you're doing when you say less frequent, deeper, is you're putting water down deep into the profile so you can create a deeper root system, which makes the plant more drought tolerant. But people don't understand, obviously, when you get a new lawn, you don't have a root system, so it's important to just wet that top layer of soil before it gets too low. So when you got a new lawn, you shouldn't be able to pull the slab or roll up and see dry dirt underneath. You have to maintain that moisture level the whole time. But when you have an established lawn and you want to make that root system deeper, I'm talking sort of 15, 20-minute irrigation cycles to the point where your lawn should be pretty sodden and pretty soaked in order to push that water down and get that root system to establish even deeper. When it comes to timing, we always say early morning is best, and people often ask why that is the case. One reason is the reason early morning is the best is you don't get the evaporation loss from the heat of the day. But there's some disease-related things why you wouldn't irrigate in the afternoon, isn't there?
Absolutely. If you're watering your lawn in the evening and you've had hot, humid conditions, which is quite common, particularly if you're north of Sydney as well, it's a perfect breeding environment for disease, and your lawn will sit sodden or damp overnight right through until the heat of the day the following day. So that can be up to 12 hours generally, where it's just hot, humid, and wet. And basically, like, no plant loves those conditions. It's going to start to decline. It's going to start to develop signs of disease. So it's actually not helping your lawn. It's the opposite. It's making it really sick. So you want to water it in the mornings before the heat of the day. Two benefits to that. One, obviously, like you said, you're not going to lose water to evaporation, but you're also preparing your lawn for the heat of that day. We see it quite often. You get a forecast for a 35, 40 degree plus day. If you give it a nice, really good drink, early morning before those conditions, your lawn's going to look great that evening. If you didn't do that, your lawn's possibly going to look pretty bumped around. It'll bounce back, absolutely, but that's the best way to prepare it for those conditions and get the most out of it.
If you have what we've learned a lot about zoysia lawns, I'll say lawns in general to a point, but more particularly with zoysia lawns, they love the morning irrigation, absolutely, but they also love what we call a syringe watering, which is a short irrigation cycle during the hottest part of the day. Now, the hottest part of the day, depending on the day, is generally 1, 2, 3 p.m. Around that sort of mark is when it generally is the hottest. So what a syringe watering is during that window, whenever it may be, just a 5-10 minute cycle with the irrigation. And what it does to zoysia grass in particular, because it's such a light irrigation cycle on a hot part of the day, it's not about wetting the soil profile. It's the equivalent of splashing a cup of water over your head on a hot day to cool you down. It cools the leaf down, and soil scientist Dr. Mick Badham, he's done a pretty extensive trial for us on the correct way to irrigate a lawn, and the trial plot that had a syringe watering, particularly the zoysia grass ones, were so much healthier, so much denser, growing so much better than the ones that didn't have a syringe watering in the hottest part of the day. So if you do have a zoysia lawn, or if you've got any lawn and you have a hot day, I'd recommend, if it's easy enough for you to do, is to put a short cycle on during the hottest part of the day, just to cool the plant down.
And obviously that depends on what sort of irrigation you've got. Whether you have to manually do it, it's going to be a lot harder to do that. You can't duck out of work in the middle of the day to go to water your lawn if you've got extreme conditions. But there's so many pieces of technology when it comes to irrigation now that are making this a lot easier. Bluetooth attachments to your hose and Wi-Fi as well, so you can basically just schedule it to come on for a short burst, just to like Joe said, give it a splash in the face and cool it down.
And people often ask, how much water should I be putting on in any one irrigation cycle? Now, our irrigation guide, we say each cycle that we talk about to be about 3 mil. But that depends on your system. It can be hard to know exactly how much water you're getting on, but there's a couple of easy ways you can measure that. Obviously, catch cups are probably the easiest thing you can do. Like, people use tuna cans and all sorts of stuff. But the process basically involves putting some small cups around the yard, turning your irrigation on for an easy-to-remember cycle, like, say, 10 minutes or whatever, and then you can get out a couple of different spots around the lawn and measure how much irrigation the lawn is actually getting on that 10-minute cycle. And then if you want to put 5 mil on, you can judge it by how long to put on your cycle.
And we see this a lot. People ask, I've been watering it for 20 minutes. When we say, well, how much water did it get? And they don't know. So one person can water their lawn for 20 minutes, another person can water their lawn for 20 minutes and have a completely different outcome of how much water the lawn is getting because of the equipment they're using. So it's important to actually know what's going on. Yeah,
and I would be wary, whilst they're a great product, I would be wary of soaker hoses, particularly in the heat of summer, particularly on a new lawn, because the mist that they throw is so fine. And if it's getting back to where it needs to go, or you've got a long, narrow area, they're great. But if it's 30 degrees and there's a westerly blowing, you're going to get next to no irrigation in your catch cup under a soaker hose. So when you're using, say you bought a new sprinkler or whatever, I think it's important to put the catch cups out early on and get a really good understanding of how much water your lawn's actually getting. The other thing the catch cups do as well, before we move on to our next point, is they show how even the distribution of the irrigation is. And this is probably more important if you've got a sprinkler system, a pop-up system in. It's important to do that every so often just to make sure different parts of the lawn are getting the irrigation they need, because it can often be missed. It'll show up pretty quickly anyway when it's not getting any water and it starts to die.
We see it, but then it becomes an issue of misdiagnosis. People start to point at things like grubs or other issues rather than realising, actually my irrigation's got an issue. It's not watering the lawn evenly. So when we troubleshoot all sorts of lawn issues, that's one of the key things we look at as well. We say, we know that conditions have just started to heat up and this is when you've started to have problems. Maybe look at your irrigation as well.
No, it's a great point. And again, I'll point everyone to our irrigation guide, which will be in the notes to this episode. It's also, I just tell people to Google Lawn Solutions Irrigation Guide and it'll generally pop up if you want to take a look at that. It works. Moving on now to a topic we mentioned briefly before, but that's dry patches in your lawn or hydrophobic soil, hydrophobia. We see this an awful lot, particularly we saw it a lot in 2018, 2019, 2020 when we had pretty bad drought on the East Coast, but we see it all the time in WA and in South Australia. Mainly in WA, obviously they're hot and dry, but their soil profiles are so sandy, and this actually happens quite regularly. But in a nutshell, what do we talk about when we talk about dry patch or hydrophobia?
Yeah, so because soil doesn't necessarily hold moisture levels exactly the same across a turf surface, you may have undulations, you may have debris in the soil, whatever it may be. You end up potentially with areas of the lawn in patches that aren't holding moisture as well as other areas, and they're the first ones to show signs of heat stress through a dry patch. We talked about discoloration earlier. If you leave that discoloration to get worse, it'll obviously become dry and brittle and yellow. It's the sort of the next steps of irrigation deprivation. So that's what we call dry patches, and there's a few reasons that it sort of occurs, and it occurs in some climates more so than others, and it usually boils down to the soil type that you got in the situation you have, and obviously how well the water's being absorbed across the lawn.
And we often hear people say, but I'm watering lots and it's still struggling. Have a look next time you're watering. So often we see the water just running off the top of the soil profile, and it's like you're watering concrete. I had a mate of mine mentioned to me the other day that he's watering his front lawn and it's all just running off and going down the driveway and not getting to where it needs to be. That's generally a sign of A, probably a compacted soil base, but B, often hydrophobia, particularly if you're on the coast and you've got a pretty sandy soil. And The best way to fix that is by using, obviously if you're watching on video you'll see this thing here, but a soil wetter or a wetting agent. Lawn soaker is the one that we have here, and there's two main types of wetting agent, but the main one you want to look at in this situation is one that is a penetrant, water penetration, and that's all about water getting through the top layer of soil, the hydrophobic layer of soil, and getting down to where it needs to get. And there's been a bunch of studies done on this, or trials done on this. They work really, really well. I know our friend Ben Sims, who runs Lawn Tips, he's done an awesome video on the effect of soil wetters on his golf green, and the difference is so stark with water sitting and pooling, and then water getting straight through and getting to where it needs to be. So we talk about cost of living before, you mentioned, and the cost of water and the environmental feel around using too much water. Soil wetters, they could half the water use you have,
absolutely,
if it's getting to where it needs to get. So they are so important to do. It's particularly beneficial when water is running straight off the top of the surface. I would also combine that with aeration too, if you can, because they generally go hand in hand, compaction and also hydrophobia. But basically the way soil wetters work is they alter the surface tension of water, allowing it to spread more evenly throughout the soil rather than beating up or forming puddles. So that's the technical, I had to read that. That's the technical way it happens there. But this facilitates better absorption and distribution of water throughout the root zone, ensuring that moisture reaches the areas where it's needed most. So, and it doesn't really matter the season or what the conditions are. They're still important to use, aren't they?
It always comes to mind when obviously conditions have been dry or hot for an extended period, and that's when you see it. You see dry, baked, hard soil, and that's when the hydrophobicness of the soil becomes evident, and then you look at starting to use soil wetters. But when you're getting a lot of rain as well, you might find the water pools, it's not getting absorbed well. It's another issue as well, like you're getting a lot of water but your drainage is poor. A lawn penetrant can help the water obviously go deeper into the soil during those times as well, make it more effective, and help that moisture level in your soil. So we highly recommend using them generally as part of a program, every year, no matter the conditions, to make sure that your soil is able to take up the water when it's available.
Yeah, and you made a good point there about, even if you get heavy rain after a dry period. Last week on the South Coast, we had a couple of storms where we got 40 mil over a 2-day period, really, really heavy rain. And people have kind of ignored the fact about wetting agents and stuff now, but they're still so evident, because when you've got compacted, hard, dry soil and then you get heavy rain, a lot of the rain actually just bounces off the soil and runs away. It doesn't actually absorb. That's why soaking rain's so much better. So even though you've had heavy rain, it's still important to look at wetting agents.
You might be like, I had a heap of rain last week and now my lawn's showing heat stress only a week or two later. It's potentially that. It's just all that water came, it washed off, didn't even absorb very well. If you had a wetting agent down, your lawn would be looking a lot better now than it did. So it's, lawn soaker, I use it every few weeks throughout summer, and my lawn has its water holding capacity is just so much better.
Yeah, they make such a difference. And again, lawn soaker is the wetting agent we're talking about here. The beauty about it is obviously it works really well as a penetrant, but it's also a hose on. It's so easy to apply. Like there's no excuse to not put wetting agents on where we're coming into summer. Now, just away from sort of irrigation and wetting agents as a method to drought-proof your lawn, I guess you'll say. Mowing heights is a really important thing. And what would you be generally saying to someone if they're looking to drought-proof their lawn when it comes to their mowing heights?
People get a little bit confused when we do the message of, raise your mowing height leading into winter, and then we also give them that same message in the height of summer. They're like, this is when I should be mowing my lawn short, right? So, absolutely. Through generally, you can lower the height of your lawn with warm season grasses throughout the warmer months and really get it to perform at its best while it's actively growing. But if you're getting extreme conditions, you're actually going to be able to help your lawn retain more moisture if you actually raise the mowing height just a notch or two throughout that period, just to make sure that it doesn't suffer from heat stress as significantly as it would if it was cut nice and short. Shorter lawns in general, they require more inputs, and that doesn't just mean water, that means nutrient as well. So the shorter you take the lawn, the more inputs and more work you're going to need to put into it. So if you give it a little bit of height, it's going to hold up so much better. It's going to hold nutrient, water, and it's not going to suffer as badly. No,
it's great advice, and shortcut lawns look fantastic, but shorter you go, then we'll work that out.
And you'll see that on sporting facilities and golf courses. They're cutting their turf really short, but that's when they need to obviously start to really up the watering programs that they have. In a home lawn situation, we don't need to have our lawns that short all the time. You can raise the height when you need to in order to make sure your lawn's performing a lot better.
And aerating, we mentioned aerating before as a combination of something to do with the wetting agent, but aerating generally is so important to do at this time of year because we talk about drought proofing your lawn. It's all about creating a healthier, denser root system, isn't it? And aerating is something that allows air, water and nutrients to get to where they need to go. So the way this drought proofs your lawn is a couple of ways. One way is it improves your soil structure and decompacts your soil, but also when you're putting that water on, it just helps it get down to where it needs to go. So aerating is so important. One tip I'll give to someone if they're looking to aerate their lawn over the summer months is to give it a really good soaking before you do it, because if we've had a hot, dry period, you're going to be aerating. Your soil can be like concrete, and it's going to be really hard to aerate and really frustrating to aerate because you just bounce off. So give it a really good soaking, and that'll make aerating the soil, a lot easier. I think we've covered everything pretty well there for drought proofing your lawn. You can always check out the Lawn Solutions website or our YouTube channel. We've done a bunch of stuff on everything that we've spoken about today, but we're in early December now, so I guess that's kind of bringing our podcast year to an end.
Yeah, we've had a good year. We've had a lot of great guests this year, and I think we're going to have a little break ourselves.
Absolutely. And if you follow the show and if you're a regular listener, we always thank you. We try and keep things as interesting as we possibly can. But if you do have someone that you think would be a good guest on the show, please reach out to us through one of the many mediums available for you to do that, and we'll do our best to get them down to Berry in the studio and on the show. We're always looking for new and interesting people to talk to. We've got a bunch of exciting ones coming up, but if there's someone that you have in mind, please let us know. So as Nath said, we're on a short break for now, but we'll be back on the 19th of January for a whole new year, 2025, year 3 of the
Turf Talk podcast. Heaps to come.
Heaps to come. So Merry Christmas, everyone. Again, thanks, and have a good new year and a good break with your friends and family, and keep loving your lawn, and we'll catch you in the new year.
Thanks, Joe.